In 1993, Marc Andreessen was 22 years old. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't famous. And he wasn't working in Silicon Valley. At the time, he was a student at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications in Illinois. Most people had never heard of the World Wide Web. In fact, most people had never used the internet at all. The internet existed, but it was difficult to navigate, slow, confusing, and largely limited to researchers, universities, and technology enthusiasts. If you wanted to find information online, there was no Google, no YouTube, no Facebook, no Wikipedia. The web was a collection of scattered pages connected by hyperlinks. The idea was powerful. The experience was terrible. Andreessen believed the problem wasn't the internet itself. The problem was access. People needed a simpler way to explore the web. A way to click instead of type. A way to browse instead of memorize commands. So he joined a small team working on an experimental project. The software was called Mosaic. At first, nobody expected much from it. But Mosaic did something important. It made the internet feel visual. Users could see images directly inside web pages. They could click links with a mouse. They could move from page to page without needing technical knowledge. For the first time, the web felt approachable. And people noticed. Downloads increased. Universities adopted it. Researchers recommended it. Then ordinary users started installing it at home. The growth was unlike anything the internet had seen before. Within months, Mosaic became the most popular way to explore the web. Suddenly, the internet felt less like a research project and more like the beginning of something much bigger. Andreessen wasn't thinking about a billion-dollar company. He wasn't thinking about Wall Street. He wasn't thinking about a battle with Microsoft. At 22, he was simply trying to make the internet easier to use. What he didn't realize was that he had helped create something far more important than a piece of software. He had helped create the first real doorway to the modern internet. And millions of people were about to walk through it. By early 1994, Mosaic had become one of the fastest-growing software projects on the internet. The web was still small, but it was no longer invisible. More people were discovering it every month. And one person was paying very close attention. Jim Clark. Clark was already wealthy. He had founded Silicon Graphics, one of the most successful computer companies of the 1980s. Most entrepreneurs would have retired. Clark was looking for his next opportunity. When he saw Mosaic, he immediately understood something many others missed. The internet wasn't just another technology trend. It was a new platform. A platform that could change how people communicated, learned, worked, and did business. Clark wanted to build a company around that idea. But he needed someone who understood the web. So he reached out to Marc Andreessen. At the time, Andreessen was only 22 years old. He had no experience running a company. No experience raising money. No experience leading a business. What he did have was a deep understanding of the technology. The two began talking. Then planning. Then recruiting engineers. Within months, they launched a new company. Its original name was Mosaic Communications. Later, it became Netscape. The goal was simple. Build the best browser in the world. And make the internet accessible to everyone. At the time, that sounded ambitious. The internet still felt experimental. Many large technology companies remained focused on personal computers, operating systems, and office software. The web seemed interesting. but not necessarily important. Netscape disagreed. The company moved at extraordinary speed. Engineers worked long hours. New features appeared constantly. Updates arrived faster than competitors could respond. The browser became known as Netscape Navigator, and people loved it. It was faster than alternatives, easier to use, and designed specifically for the rapidly growing web. As more websites appeared, more people downloaded Netscape. As more people downloaded Netscape, more websites were created. The cycle reinforced itself. By the middle of 1995, Netscape had become the dominant browser on the internet. Some estimates placed its market share above 80%. For a young company that had existed for barely a year, the growth was astonishing. Inside Silicon Valley, people were beginning to realize something important. The browser was not just software. The browser might become the most important application in computing. And if that happened, the company controlling the browser could control the future of the internet. On August 9, 1995, Netscape went public. The company was only 16 months old. It had never reported a profit, and yet investors could not buy shares fast enough. Before trading began, demand surged. The original offering price was increased, then increased again. Even that wasn't enough. When the market opened, the stock exploded. Within hours, Netscape's value reached levels normally associated with mature corporations. Wall Street had seen successful technology companies before, but this felt different. Netscape wasn't being valued based on what it was. It was being valued based on what investors believed the internet might become. And for the first time, the financial world began treating the internet as a serious economic force. The reaction spread far beyond Silicon Valley. Newspapers covered the story. Television networks covered the story. Investors who had never used the internet suddenly wanted exposure to internet companies. Entrepreneurs noticed. Venture capital firms noticed. Executives noticed. Everyone seemed to reach the same conclusion at the same time. Something important was happening, and nobody wanted to be left behind. For Netscape employees, the transformation was surreal. Many had joined a small startup. Now they were working at one of the most talked about companies in America. Mark Andreessen became a symbol of the new internet generation. Young, ambitious, and suddenly very wealthy. Magazine covers followed. Interviews followed. Attention followed. The company appeared unstoppable. But success created a new problem. The bigger Netscape became, the harder it was to ignore. And somewhere in Redmond, Washington, executives at Microsoft were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. For years, Windows had been the center of personal computing. But what if software no longer mattered? What if the browser became the platform? What if the web became more important than Windows? Those questions worried one person more than anyone else: Bill Gates. And once Bill Gates became concerned, the story changed. The battle that would define the future of the internet was about to begin. By 1995, Microsoft was one of the most powerful companies in the world. Windows ran on the majority of personal computers. Microsoft Office dominated productivity software. The company seemed untouchable. For years, Bill Gates had focused on making Windows the center of personal computing. If people wanted to use software, they used Windows. If software companies wanted customers, they built for Windows. It was one of the strongest positions any technology company had ever achieved. Then Netscape appeared. At first, Microsoft did not seem particularly concerned. The internet looked interesting. Important, perhaps, but not necessarily urgent. That changed quickly. Every month, Netscape grew larger. Every month, more websites appeared. Every month, more people spent time inside a browser. And that created a dangerous possibility. What if the browser became the platform? If applications moved onto the web, the operating system underneath them might become less important. For Microsoft, that was a nightmare scenario. Windows was the foundation of the company's power. Anything that threatened Windows threatened Microsoft itself. Bill Gates understood this before many others did. In May 1995, he sent a memo to Microsoft's senior leadership. The document was titled, "The Internet Tidal Wave." The memo was more than 5,000 words long. Its message was unmistakable. Microsoft had underestimated the internet, and that mistake needed to be corrected immediately. Gates described the internet as one of the most important developments since the personal computer. He warned that Microsoft could not afford to fall behind. The company shifted into emergency mode. Projects were reorganized. Resources were reassigned. Teams were redirected. The internet became Microsoft's highest priority. Inside the company, the message was clear. Netscape was no longer just another startup. It was a strategic threat. And Microsoft intended to respond. The coming battle would not be between two browsers. It would be between a young company trying to shape the future and one of the most powerful corporations on Earth trying to protect its empire. The browser war had not officially begun, but both sides could already see it coming. In the summer of 1995, representatives from Netscape traveled to Microsoft's headquarters in Redmond. At the time, Netscape was still the dominant browser company. Its market share was enormous. Its growth was extraordinary, and many believed it represented the future of the internet. The meeting would later become one of the most controversial moments in technology history. Accounts differ. Memories differ. Interpretations differ. But one thing is clear. Both companies understood they were heading toward a collision. According to Netscape executives, Microsoft suggested a division of the market. Microsoft would focus on certain areas. Netscape would focus on others. Competition could be avoided. Microsoft denied that characterization. Years later, lawyers, regulators, and historians would continue debating exactly what happened in that room. But whatever was said, the outcome was obvious. No agreement was reached, and neither company intended to back down. Shortly afterward, Microsoft accelerated development of Internet Explorer. The browser had existed before, but now it became a strategic weapon. The goal was no longer participation. The goal was victory. At Netscape, executives remained confident. They had the better browser, the larger user base, the stronger brand, and the loyalty of much of the internet community. Many believed Microsoft was too late. The web was moving too quickly. Netscape had too much momentum. But Microsoft possessed something Netscape did not: Windows. More than 90% of personal computers already relied on Microsoft's operating system. That advantage was enormous. Every new computer sold represented an opportunity. Every Windows installation represented a distribution channel. And Microsoft was preparing to use it. By the end of 1995, the browser war was no longer a possibility. It was reality. Engineers worked around the clock. New browser versions appeared constantly. Features were copied, improved, and copied again. The internet was becoming a battlefield, and both sides understood that winning meant more than controlling a browser. Winning could determine who controlled the future of computing itself. At first, Netscape executives believed they had a straightforward advantage. Their browser was popular, widely respected, and improving rapidly. If the competition came down to product quality, Netscape felt confident. But Microsoft was playing a different game. Netscape sold software. Microsoft sold Windows. That distinction changed everything. For Netscape, the browser itself needed to generate revenue. For Microsoft, Internet Explorer did not. Microsoft could afford to give the browser away for free. And that is exactly what it did. The decision shocked much of the industry. Software companies were accustomed to selling software. Giving away a major product seemed irrational. But Microsoft was not trying to make money from Internet Explorer. Microsoft was trying to protect Windows. If Internet Explorer helped preserve the Windows ecosystem, the browser had already done its job. Netscape suddenly faced a problem. How do you compete against free? Every customer Microsoft acquired cost nothing. Every customer Netscape acquired required marketing, support, and distribution. The economics were completely different. Then Microsoft made another move. Internet Explorer became part of Windows. Users no longer needed to download a browser. They no longer needed to buy one. The browser was already waiting for them. Millions of new computers shipped with Internet Explorer installed by default. For many consumers, the choice had effectively been made before they ever connected to the internet. At Netscape, executives watched market share begin to slide. Slowly at first, then more quickly. The company continued improving Navigator. New versions were released. Performance improved. Features expanded. But product quality was no longer the only factor. Distribution mattered. Pricing mattered. Control of the operating system mattered. And Microsoft possessed advantages that Netscape could not match. The browser war was no longer a battle between two products. It had become a battle between two business models. One company needed to sell the browser. The other company simply needed to make sure nobody else controlled it. And in that kind of fight, the rules were very different. By 1997, the browser war had entered a new phase. Netscape was still fighting, still releasing updates, still improving Navigator. But Microsoft had begun using its most powerful advantage: Windows. Every year, millions of new personal computers were sold around the world. And almost all of them ran Microsoft's operating system. That gave Microsoft something no competitor could match: a direct path to the customer. Internet Explorer was no longer just a browser people could download. It was becoming part of Windows itself. For many users, Internet Explorer appeared automatically the moment they turned on a new computer. No installation required. No additional purchase required. No effort required. The browser was simply there. This changed consumer behavior. Most people did not spend hours comparing software. Most people used whatever came with their computer. Convenience often beats preference. And Microsoft understood that better than anyone. The impact was immediate. Internet Explorer's market share began rising. Netscape's market share began falling. Not because Navigator had suddenly become a bad product. Not because users had stopped liking it. but because distribution had become more powerful than innovation. At Netscape, frustration grew. Engineers continued building. Managers continued planning. Executives continued fighting. Yet every quarter brought the same trend. Microsoft gained. Netscape lost. Meanwhile, computer manufacturers faced difficult choices. Many depended on Windows. Few wanted to risk damaging their relationship with Microsoft. As Internet Explorer became more deeply integrated into Windows, the competitive landscape changed. The battlefield no longer looked fair. To Netscape, it felt as if Microsoft had moved the fight from the browser market to the operating system market. And that was a place where Microsoft had almost unlimited power. For years, Netscape had believed the web would weaken Windows. Instead, Microsoft had found a way to use Windows to dominate the web. The strategy was brutally effective. And by the time Netscape fully understood the scale of the problem, the company was already losing control of the future it had helped create. By 1998, the browser war was no longer just a dispute between two technology companies. It had become a national issue. Complaints about Microsoft's behavior were growing louder. Competitors complained. Industry observers complained. Regulators began paying attention. At the center of the controversy was a simple question. Was Microsoft winning because it built a better browser? Or because it controlled Windows? For years, Microsoft's dominance in operating systems had gone largely unchallenged. But now critics argued that the company was using that dominance to eliminate competition in entirely different markets. The browser market was only the beginning. If Microsoft could use Windows to dominate browsers, what would stop it from dominating everything else? The concerns eventually reached the United States Department of Justice. An antitrust investigation followed. Then lawsuits. Then court hearings. Internal Microsoft emails became public. Executives were called to testify. The browser war moved from engineering departments to courtrooms. For Netscape, the case represented hope. The company had been losing market share for years. It could not outspend Microsoft. It could not outdistribute Microsoft. Perhaps regulators could do what the market had failed to do. Perhaps they could slow Microsoft down. But legal battles move slowly. Technology moves quickly. And while lawyers argued in court, the browser market continued changing. Internet Explorer continued growing. Netscape continued shrinking. By the time the government fully entered the fight, the outcome of the browser war was already becoming clear. Microsoft had achieved its primary objective. Internet Explorer had become a dominant force on the web. The government might punish Microsoft. It might limit Microsoft. It might even win in court. But none of those outcomes would automatically restore Netscape's position. The company had helped trigger one of the most important antitrust cases in modern history. Yet that victory would not save its business. For Netscape employees, the realization was painful. The world finally understood what had happened. But understanding it was not the same as reversing it. The battle in the courtroom was just beginning. The battle in the marketplace was already ending. By the end of the 1990s, the browser war was effectively over. Internet Explorer dominated the market. Netscape's market share continued falling. And the company that had once defined the web was running out of options. In November 1998, AOL announced it would acquire Netscape. The deal was valued at more than $4 billion. At first glance, the acquisition seemed logical. AOL controlled one of the largest audiences on the internet. Netscape still had a respected brand. Together, some believed they could challenge Microsoft's growing influence. Inside Silicon Valley, reactions were mixed. Some saw the acquisition as a rescue. Others saw it as a surrender. The company that had once terrified Microsoft was no longer fighting alone. It was looking for a buyer. For Mark Andreessen and many early employees, the moment felt strange. Only a few years earlier, Netscape had been the most exciting company in technology. Its IPO had helped ignite the dot-com boom. Its browser had introduced millions of people to the web. Now it was being absorbed into another company. The speed of the rise had been extraordinary. The speed of the decline was equally remarkable. AOL attempted to keep Netscape relevant. New browser versions were released. Marketing campaigns continued. But the momentum was gone. Developers increasingly focused elsewhere. Users increasingly focused elsewhere. The internet had moved on. And Netscape struggled to keep up. Meanwhile, Internet Explorer continued strengthening its position. Each year made a comeback less likely. The browser that had once defined the internet was becoming a memory. By the early 2000s, most new internet users had never experienced the web through Netscape. They knew Internet Explorer. They knew Windows. But Netscape was slowly disappearing from everyday life. For many companies, that would have been the end of the story. But Netscape's final decision would prove more important than anyone realized. Because before the company faded away, it left something behind. Something that would eventually shape the future of the web all over again. In 1998, as Netscape struggled to survive, the company made a decision that seemed almost desperate. It released the source code of its browser to the public. Anyone could study it, modify it, improve it, and contribute to it. At the time, many observers were skeptical. The browser war was already turning against Netscape. Internet Explorer was gaining market share. Microsoft's resources appeared overwhelming. Open sourcing the browser felt less like a strategy and more like a last resort. But something unexpected happened. Developers around the world became interested. Programmers who had never worked for Netscape began contributing code. Engineers started improving features. Volunteers fixed bugs. New ideas appeared. The project became known as Mozilla. At first, progress was slow. Building a browser through an open-source community was far more complicated than many expected. The early years were difficult. Some critics dismissed the effort entirely. Others argued it was too late. Microsoft had already won. Internet Explorer controlled the market. Why would anyone switch? But Mozilla kept going. Year after year. Release after release. The community grew. The software improved. And eventually, Mozilla produced a new browser, Firefox. For many internet users, Firefox felt refreshing. It was faster, cleaner, and often more innovative than Internet Explorer. Features appeared that users had been requesting for years. Pop-up blocking, tabbed browsing, improved security. Firefox gave people a reason to leave Internet Explorer. And for the first time in years, Microsoft faced meaningful competition again. The browser war that seemed finished suddenly had a second chapter. The remarkable part was that Firefox existed because Netscape had failed. If Netscape had won the browser war, Mozilla might never have existed. If Microsoft had crushed the project completely, Firefox might never have existed. History had taken a strange path. The company was gone. The browser was gone. But the ideas survived. And those ideas were about to influence another company. A company that would eventually dominate the web in a way Netscape never could. Google. By the middle of the 2000s, Firefox had become a genuine threat to Internet Explorer. Millions of users switched. Developers embraced it. Technology enthusiasts recommended it. For the first time in years, Microsoft's dominance appeared vulnerable. One company paid particularly close attention: Google. At the time, Google's business depended heavily on the web. The company wanted an open internet, a competitive internet, an internet where no single company controlled access. Firefox helped create that environment. Google actively supported Firefox. The two organizations worked closely together. Many users viewed them as natural allies. And for a while, they were. But Google was learning something important. The browser was becoming more than a tool for viewing websites. It was becoming a platform. Applications were moving online. Email was moving online. Documents were moving online. Entire businesses were moving online. The browser was becoming the operating system of the web. And Google did not want that platform controlled by someone else. In 2008, the company launched its own browser, Google Chrome. At first, many people were surprised. Why would Google enter a market that already contained Internet Explorer, Firefox, Opera, and Safari? The answer became clear over time. Google believed the browser would shape the future of computing. Just as Netscape had believed more than a decade earlier. Chrome was fast, simple, minimal, and deeply connected to Google's growing ecosystem. Users adopted it quickly, then more quickly, then at a scale that shocked the industry. Within a few years, Chrome became one of the most popular browsers in the world. Eventually, it became the dominant browser. The irony was difficult to miss. The company that finally defeated Internet Explorer had built part of its success on ideas that traced back to Firefox. And Firefox existed because Netscape had released its code. The browser war appeared to have ended years earlier. But its consequences continued shaping the internet long afterward. The names changed. The companies changed. The technologies changed. Yet traces of Netscape remained everywhere, hidden beneath the surface of the modern web. When people talk about the history of the internet, they usually remember the winners: Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon. The companies that survived. The companies that became giants. Netscape rarely appears on that list. For many younger internet users, the name means nothing. Some have never heard it before. Others vaguely remember seeing the logo years ago. Yet the modern web would look very different without it. Netscape did not invent the internet. It did not invent the World Wide Web. It did not create the browser. But it helped bring those ideas to ordinary people. At a moment when the web still felt experimental, Netscape made it accessible. At a moment when most companies ignored the internet, Netscape treated it seriously. At a moment when few investors understood what the web could become, Netscape convinced them it mattered. The company existed for only a brief period at the center of the technology industry. Yet during that short time, it accelerated the growth of the internet in ways that are still visible today. Its browser introduced millions of people to the web. Its IPO helped launch the dot-com era. Its competition with Microsoft helped shape antitrust policy for a generation. Its source code helped create Mozilla. Mozilla helped create Firefox. And Firefox influenced the browser ecosystem that eventually produced Chrome. The chain is impossible to ignore. The company disappeared. The influence remained. History often tells us that winning is everything. Technology history tells a different story. Some companies win markets. Other companies change the direction of markets. Those are not always the same companies. Netscape lost the browser war. That much is true. But losing the war and losing the future are not always the same thing. Today, billions of people use browsers every day. They search, communicate, work, learn, shop, watch videos, build businesses, and connect with the world. Most of them have never used Netscape Navigator. Most of them never will. Yet part of the path that brought them online began with a browser created by a group of engineers who believed the internet could be simpler, more accessible, and available to everyone. In the end, Netscape did not become the company that controlled the internet. It became something stranger. A company that helped create the modern internet, then disappeared inside it. And perhaps that is why its story still matters. Because sometimes the most important companies in history are not the ones that win. They are the ones that change the game so completely that the world forgets what came before. That is the unspoken system. Yesterday's advantage can become tomorrow's weakness.